I'm Sam Meggs. I am the author of books, comics, and video games, including the Fangirl's Guide to the Galaxy and the upcoming Girl Squads. It was super hard to narrow it down to just 20 groups of awesome women who had done great things through history. Obviously, there are tons of examples. For me, what made it easiest to narrow it down was looking outside of the teams of women that you kind of find first when you go looking. So that's often white women, straight women, Western women, which there are plenty of in the book as well. But the most interesting women and the most interesting stories for me were the ones that span the globe. So, you know, we're talking about women in medieval France who were the first female poets ever. We're talking about the two Vietnamese sisters in the year 1000 who defended their land from Chinese invaders on the backs of elephants. We're talking about the Patriotic Women's League of Iran in the 1920s, and even Afghanistan's first all-female orchestra who are operating right now. So it was really great to go all over the world and investigate all these different kinds of cultures and stories in different times. I mean, it was really tough. Actually, I have like one of the first ever copies of the book right here, which I'm super excited about. They had it here at Comic-Con for the very first time. I'm not afraid to tell you that I cried when I saw it on the con floor like a cool kid in front of everybody. For me, honestly, it was actually Zora, the Afghani women's orchestra that's operating right now, because a lot of the ones in the past, you know, you think about like, wow, it was really hard for women 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. That's where you kind of expect those stories to live. But hearing about all the hardships that these girls go through just trying to get up and play music every day in a country where not only is it difficult to be a woman pursuing a career, but also music has a very fraught history with the Taliban. Learning about all of that was really fascinating and very surprising, and they're incredibly brave, and I think it's just cool that they're pushing those boundaries even today. I think my favorite story is one that was also in Wonder Woman. I couldn't help but use it again in this book. Her name was Anandabai Joshi, and in the late 1800s in India, she really wanted to become a doctor, but she wasn't allowed to go to school or even be literate in India. So what she ended up doing is becoming pen pals with a young widow in New Jersey named Theodosia Carpenter. The two of them exchanged letters for years, became like best friends over the ocean, and then eventually Theodosia invited Anandi to come live with her, and she attended medical school here in Philadelphia, and then went back to India and became the first MD, like female doctor in India, and opened a school for training women GPs there. And this is in like the late 1800s, so a really cool story of female friendship spanning oceans even way back then. And this story comes from, so Anandi really wanted to come to America to study, and they had appealed to a bunch of missionaries, but they said that they weren't allowed, like she wouldn't be allowed to come study in America unless she renounced her Hinduism, which she was not into. And Theodosia was waiting at her doctor's office, or a dentist's office in Roselle, New Jersey, and saw this story about Anandi in a magazine that was on her dentist's like waiting room table. And that's how she discovered her. And it's just like, it's so weird, and who would ever have thought, but I don't know, I love stuff like that. Like, we're all just people, I think, no matter when or where we are. It's these stories of human friendship and friendship between women. The story is the same, no matter when and where, and I think that's really cool. Wonder Women was my last book. It was 25 profiles of women throughout history in science, technology, engineering, math, invention, espionage. Also super interesting to research and put together. But with that book, first of all, I was limited to science. In Girl Squads, we've got athletes, we've got artists, we've got activists. It kind of spans the many new horizons in terms of cool stuff that women did. But also with Wonder Women, it was really focused on individual women. I was really telling individual stories, and they had help, and there were some cameos here and there, occasionally from nice women, occasionally from jerk dudes. You know how it works out. But with Girl Squads, it was really about telling stories of groups of women and teams of women. We are so often, I think, taught in this society and raised to be competitive with each other instead of cooperative with each other. We suffer from this kind of like Highlander syndrome of like, there can be only one. There can be only one woman in video games. There can be only one science communicator. There can be one YouTuber with red hair, whatever, you know? But it was great to be able to write a book sharing stories about cooperation between women, because we really are stronger together than we are apart. Being a game writer writer is kind of like being a writer for all sorts of different types of fiction put into like one blender and spit out. So it is a little bit like writing a script because you're writing dialogue, you're writing characters, you're writing plots. It's a little bit like writing a TV show because you're usually in a writer's room. It's a really collaborative process where you're coming up with, you know, the different parts of the story, the different episodes, the different characters. But then it's also a little bit like being a game designer because you also kind of, especially with games like Bioware games or games where there is branching dialogue or dialogue choices, you kind of have to learn how to negotiate basically making a very complicated choose-your-own-adventure computer program. So it's a little bit of all three things. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, I think game writing is really about creating compelling characters in a really great and interesting and innovative setting. One of my favorite things about game writing is that it is so collaborative, that it's not just you, and actually it's not just you and your other writers, it's also you and your designers and your level artists and your cinematic artists, because I can sit there and say, like, I can sit by myself and type and be like, and then 7 unicorns fly across the sky and make a rainbow, and then like one of the guys is gonna be like, okay, well, we can only have one figure on the screen at a time. So it's okay if it's 1 unicorn instead of 7? And you're like, yeah, okay, 1 unicorn, that's fine, we're ready. And then another guy is gonna be like, well, we only have a rig for a goat. So is it okay if it's like a goat instead of a unicorn? And then you're gonna be like, yeah, okay, no, it's gonna be a goat now. And so like now my story about like 7 unicorns is now a story about like 1 goat. And it's just about sort of negotiating that process between all these different teams to make something collaborative that is the best. Because at the end of the day, like, my story about 7 unicorns is probably not as interesting as the cool story about 1 goat that we're gonna tell at the end. And, you know, artists have so many better ideas than I ever would about art and et cetera. It's great to rely on the strengths of all these different people and their incredible talents. So it's really fun. I feel really fortunate to be able to be on so many teams of really great people, you know, both men and women. But I think that gaming is like any other sort of nerd industry, you know, for a really long time. It was a lot of guys and a lot of like it was a very homogenous field. And I think we're at a really great time now where we're starting to see a lot more diversity, both on the screen in terms of characters and representation, but also behind the screen in terms of creators. Because for me, you know, the most interesting stories come out of a diversity of experience. So my experience is going to be different than a woman of color. You know, I'm a queer woman. It's going to be different than a straight woman's experience. And the more people telling their stories we have, whether it's behind the screen or behind the page of a comic or behind a television show, the more interesting kinds of different tales we're gonna get. I think it's really nice to see myself on the screen in a bunch of different ways, and I'm sure everybody feels that way to a certain extent, right? Everybody just wants to see their own story on the screen, and that doesn't mean that I want to see less of any one kind of story. It just means that there's so many opportunities to tell many kinds of different stories, so we all get to see ourselves represented, and that's the great thing about how many games there are now, how many comics, how many movies. You know, there can really be something that appeals to everyone, no matter what you're into. My advice to geeky girls growing up now would be to find your passion and to hold on to it and to pursue it, because nobody can tell your story except for you. And we really need those stories. We really need your voice. So don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't be into these things. Don't let anyone chase you away. You know, be brave, be confident in the fact that you have something valuable to give to this community. And then once you're there, do it. Make something and finish something and put it online, because there are people out there who are desperate for it, who want to see it and who are going to love it and who are just waiting for it right now. So that's my advice.